Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be covering some of the most important things you need to know about getting into 10th edition 40k. Whether you are a fresh-faced conscript still wet behind the ears, getting into 40k for the first time, or a grizzled veteran making the transition from 9th to 10th, this video is going to guide you into the new edition of 40k. All of the information I'm going to share with you today is based on my own battlefield experience. This is not just theory hammer. I have been fortunate enough to play over half a dozen games of the new edition, and it has really opened my eyes. But without further ado, I'll stop blueballing you guys now. Let's dive right into today's episode. The first thing that we're going to cover very well may be the most important thing you need to learn from this video. If this is the only thing you take away from it, it will have been worth watching. 10th edition is all about having the right tool for the job, having the right weapon for dealing with a specific type of enemy unit. When engaging enemy tanks, you need to have dedicated AT. When engaging enemy infantry, you need to have volume of fire. Now, this might sound kind of obvious to newer players, but for veteran players of the game, this is a massive difference between 9th and 10th. In previous editions of 40k, you were able to grind through enemy tanks by spamming loads of medium volume of fire, medium strength, medium AP, medium damage weapons. Those days are now gone. They are completely dead. If you try and use a bunch of side Gatling cannons to grind through some Lehman Russ battle tanks, you will fail, and you will in return be heavily punished by the enemy's dedicated anti-tank weapons. This is because vehicle and monster toughness has gone up massively. They are now incredibly tanky. Most weapons in the game are going to wound vehicles and monsters on 6s, and if they're lucky, they'll wound them on 5s and 6s. Only proper dedicated AT, the really punchy stuff, is going to start wounding vehicles on 4s, and only the bigger stuff is going to wound those proper heavy vehicles on 3s. This means that if you try and apply your 9th edition approach to 10th edition vehicles, all that's going to happen is you're going to be fishing for 6s, and sometimes you'll catch something, but often you just won't manage it. Fishing for 6s is a really unreliable tactic. I've tried it in a couple of games now, and it just doesn't work. You need to be able to punch through that armor. On the flip side though, if you do apply anti-tank to a tank, it actually feels effective and powerful. Suddenly it no longer feels like you're butting your head up against a brick wall, and you'll start taking big chunks out of enemy units quickly. Simply put, 10th edition will reward you for putting the right weapon against the right enemy unit, and it will punish you if you try and force a square peg through a round hole. However, if you have a unit that is able to engage multiple different enemy types, that is extremely valuable. For example, you could take a Necron Monolith. It has a large particle whip that has fantastic volume of fire and is great for clearing out big hordes thanks to the blast special rule. More on that special rule in just a moment. But it also can take multiple death rays, which are great for punching through enemy tanks. This means that whilst the Monolith might be quite a big and expensive unit, it will actually be very valuable in 10th because it can engage anything with ease. But this leads me on to the second little bit of important knowledge about 10th I want to share with you. I think that Blast is going to be a really powerful, if not the most powerful, universal special rule in the game. It allows you to take that square peg and turn it into a round one. What do I mean by this? Well, Blast weapons are pretty common. Whether you're Imperial, Xenos, or Heretic, you've got access to something that is either exactly a battle cannon or the equivalent to it. What I'm saying is most factions have access to this kind of heavy ordnance, and it's got good strength, decent AP, and brilliant damage, which makes it good at dealing with enemy vehicles. But thanks to Blast, it's also good at engaging enemy infantry as well, because Blast gives you +1 extra shot for every 5 models in an enemy unit. That means if you're engaging one of those new Flamer Space Marine squads, you'll get 2 extra shots. If you're engaging one of those new Blob squads of guards with 20-25 infantry in there, you're going to get 4 extra shots. And if you start engaging some of the biggest Tyrannid swarms, 30 termagants to a brood, you'll get 6 extra shots in addition to whatever the weapon was firing already. And a lot of blast weapons are now D6 plus 3 shots as standard. Therefore, if you were to shoot a battle cannon into a unit of termagants, you would end up with D6 plus 9. Plenty of volume of fire to start dealing with those hordes. Now, some savvy viewers may have noticed a little bit of a trend with what I've been highlighting so far. It's been very much focused on vehicles. I really think that 10th edition is going to be a mechanized and armored one. A lot of the improvements that we're seeing coming to the game, a lot of the changes that are happening between the 2 editions are focused around our battle tanks, our carriers, our transports, our big bugs, and our monsters. Generally speaking, most of the tanks and monsters that have been previewed by Games Workshop so far have been improved. You've got either extra toughness or firepower or abilities or all 3. But it's not just the damage dealers and the main battle tanks which have had improvements. Our transports, APCs and IFBs have all generally had a big glow up as well, with one of the most important factors being you can now move and then disembark from a transport. On paper, being able to move and then get out feels like kind of a nice to have. Ooh, I can use that to move on to objective and capture it. Very nice. In reality, you start realizing how impactful this is, especially after you've played a game or 2. Being able to take not just your line infantry and stick them on objective, but being able to take your veteran, your killie, your really badass mothers and just put them in a transport, zip them across the board, get them to jump out and just smash the entire area is a really effective way of delivering an alpha strike. And there's one vehicle that has massively exceeded our expectations here in the Mordian Glory Battle Bunker. One vehicle which has been able to sling out the shots, take the punishment, and deliver forces right into the heart of enemy formations. It is the Land Raider. That's right, the venerable Space Marine battle brick is back, and a big part of what is making it so effective on the battlefield is the assault ramp. This special rule allows you to move the Land Raider, but not only then, disembark and move and do what you want, but also charge. This makes Adeptus Astartes turn 1 assaults with some of their best combat infantry not only possible, but almost inevitable. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the early meta of 10th edition being dominated by Land Raider assault tactics. The idea of one of these things stuffed to the gills with Death Company charging into my guard lines turn 1 genuinely fills me with fear. But it's not just the vehicles which have changed significantly in the new edition. The way you are going to use characters and which characters are going to be meta and which ones are going to be left on the shelf is going to come down to one simple thing. The new leader rules will make or break your heroes. You see, myself and Traitor Tom have played loads of games of 10th edition in the Mordian Glory Battle Bunker, some of which we've turned to battle ports and some things we've just been trying out and seeing what sticks. But one thing that has become really apparent to us, even after just playing a handful of our first few initial games, was that those characters which can be protected by units, those characters which can essentially stack on loads of ablative wounds, be they Gants or Space Marines or Guardsmen, are incredibly powerful and really valuable. And conversely, those characters which don't have leader, even if they've got things like Lone Operative, which makes them kind of hard to target at range, they're still not as good as those which are actually embedded inside some squads. And the reason for this is kind of obvious when you start playing the game. Your characters are so much more vulnerable when they're out strutting around doing their own thing. One of the big problems in 9th edition, which Leader has obviously been introduced to correct, is the issue of charging multiple units into one combat. So for example, you might have a unit of Space Marines and a captain and a lieutenant that all charge into an enemy unit. But you only get to strike with one of those guys first, before your opponent has a chance to interrupt. This invariably leads to you going off half-cocked, where you get to swing with some of your guys, but then your opponent stops, interrupts, and then kills the ones that haven't had a chance to go yet. This can put the assaulting player in a really tricky position because you might need all of your guys to go off in order to be able to win the fight. That's what you've lined up, that's what you've set up to go off. But suddenly you go with your captain, and then your opponent turns around and he kills your lieutenant and Space Marines. And it's like, oh, well, that fight should absolutely have been in my favor, but now I've just had it taken out from underneath me. Now, obviously, this is going to cause the Space Marine player to feel kind of bad, which is never something you want to have in a game. And the knock-on effect is it means that you have a lot less cool combats happening in the game. Characters tend to do one of two things in 9th edition. They either sit at the back buffing, which can be very nice and useful as a force multiplier, but not particularly epic or heroic. You want that commissar leading the bayonet charge, not just sending the men forward and him just sitting back there having tea. Not every commissar is Kaifer's Kane. And on the other hand, it means that you end up with a bunch of combat characters that are just lone wolfing it, kind of like John Wick or some kind of Maverick, and they're just going around doing their own thing, but once again, they're not really leading anything. But this is where the new 10th edition leader rules completely mix up the game, and they're going to require players to completely change the way that they're currently approaching their characters. If you have that Space Marine captain with jump pack running around on his own, he's just going to get picked off before he ever gets anywhere near the fight. Make sure you've got him stacked in that unit of Assault Marines or Vanguard Veterans, whatever your preference is, and that way he's protected. But it's not just about protecting your characters, it's also about upping the lethality of your assault, because you're able to project much greater force concentration with the new leader mechanic. Think about it. No longer do you need to make that difficult decision of, do I charge my Vanguard Veterans or do I charge my captain? I really want both to go off, but I know my opponent will kill one if I just charge both in. Now that's all gone away. You can stack a captain, a lieutenant, and the whole big assault blob together, and you can charge them all in, and they all get to strike before your opponent even has a chance to do anything about it. This is going to make your assaults much more brutal, much more effective, and if you're on the receiving end of an assault army, you need to plan for this, because if you're not careful, those assaults are going to tear huge chunks out of your army before you've even had a chance to respond to them. One of the ways that you might want to respond to an aggressive opponent who's doing a lot of damage to you is by taking advantage of the new in-game respawning mechanics. We've seen a number of factions that can bring back models throughout a game. Tyranids, Necrons, Imperial Guard, and this is a huge shift in playstyle by GW. During 8th and 9th edition, Games Workshop moved away from being able to regenerate forces in-game. There were always some exceptions that proved the rule. Beginning of 8th, you had regenerating cultists and poxwalkers, and you could even bring back some guardsmen. But very quickly, GW moved away from that, and instead they focused on the idea of what you bring to the table are all the assets that you have to use in the game. But that's no longer the case, and not only has Games Workshop reintroduced these mechanics, but they've been kind of generous with them as well. The fact that Tyranids for one command point can regenerate up to 12 infantry in a turn is pretty staggering, and on average they're going to bring back a starting size squad of termagants or hormagaunts every single time they play that stratagem. And on top of this, That stratagem is essentially free if they take a character like the Swarm Lord, who gives them an extra CP every turn. Or what about the Guard, who can now bring back full 20-man size squads for 2 command points, and there are ways for them to essentially get that squad back for 1 command point rather than 2, and if you're lucky, you might even be able to get it back for free if you're spamming loads of Voxcasters. Sure, those men are going to be unsupported by officers, but it's still more meat you can push into the grind, and it's still essentially allowing you to play a 2,000 point game with more than 2,000 points. And all of that pales in comparison to the Necrons and their reanimation protocols, which allows them to bring back D3 wounds into each unit every single turn, completely for free. No command points or nothing, it's just their army rules. It's one thing to be able to bring back some termagants or some guardsmen, but the idea that you can heal D3 wounds on a monolith, the idea that you could potentially bring back 2 destroyers in a turn is massive, and it's definitely something that players of 40k are going to need to wrap their heads around quickly if they don't want to be wrong-footed. Let me be clear here, I don't want anyone getting the wrong impression. I'm not complaining about these rules. I love the idea of endless swarms of Tyranids, of constantly repairing Necrons, of wave after wave of conscripts being sent in. But it's definitely something that you're going to have to take into account, because not only is it going to affect your tactics. Oh, I've blown that unit off that objective. Oh no, I haven't. They've just come back on for 2 command points. Oh, I've finally secured that flank. No, I haven't. The enemy's just reinforced. Not only are you going to have to take it into account from a tactical gameplay point of view, but you're also going to take it into account from a time point of view. 2 armies with a lot of respawning could potentially take a long time to play, and it could be a very grindy game. Now, if you're playing at home in your battle bunker, that's not necessarily a problem. You've got all day, maybe even all weekend to drink some beers, eat some pretzels, and play some 40k. But if you're playing in a tournament where each round has got a fixed time limit, you're going to have to take that into account. But don't worry if you are playing against one of these respawning forces. There are a number of ways that you can counter them. Straight away, for example, with the Guard, if you leave 1 or 2 guys left over in one of those big blob squads, they can't respawn it. They have to have the squad completely wiped out. So if you leave a bunch of shattered guardsmen around, you'll quickly find the Guard player getting frustrated, not able to leverage that advantage he's got. Great way of countering it. And likewise with things like Tyranids and Necrons, if you just completely annihilate and wipe out those squads, they can't respawn into them mid-game. However, there is one last big change that we need to talk about, and it kind of links into bringing guys back into units and respawning and regenerating, because this rule that we're about to cover, in my opinion, is the biggest change from 9th to 10th edition, and it means being able to bring back guys into squads in game, ones that are still alive, is more powerful than being able to bring a full squad back from the dead as reinforcement. I'm talking about the new line of sight and cover rules. Right now in 9th edition, if you can see 1 man from a squad, even if the rest of his unit is tucked out of line of sight, in cover, in a ruin, totally obscured, if you shoot that 1 guy, any extra damage you do to his unit spills over to his squad mates. So for example, if you have a squad of 5 Space Marines and you shoot them with a heavy bolter and you get 3 hits, 3 wounds, and your opponent fails 3 saves, he loses 3 Space Marines, even if only 1 of them was exposed. In 10th edition, this is no longer the case. You can only kill what you can see. So if you shoot that heavy bolter at those Space Marines and you get 3 kills, you actually only get to kill the 1 Marine that was exposed, and the other 2 shots, the other 2 successful wounds, the other 2 failed armor saves go away, and they do not spill over into the other squad mates. This is going to make those weapons that have indirect fire, the ability to target units out of line of sight, incredibly important and valuable. You need to be able to target those units you can't see, not only just because they might be holding an objective, but also if they're an assault force, you need to be able to soften them up and weaken them, or they're going to hit your lines at full strength or near as damage to it. Even though the indirect fire nerf that was introduced partway through 9th has made it into 10th, in fact it's part of the core rules, indirect fire is still going to be vital. Every faction is going to want to be scouring through their unit options right now and picking out those units which they can use to bombard the enemy from afar without needing line of sight. I do have a couple of concerns about the new cover rules and line of sight rules. Firstly, I'm worried it'll make a 2-tier game, where if you've got those factions which are very shooty, but don't have a huge amount of indirect fire or ways of being able to counter assault effectively, they might end up at the bottom of the pile because they can't soften the enemy up and they can't get the lines of sight onto them before the enemy is in amongst them, tearing them to pieces. I think that more so than ever, line of sight is going to be really impactful. And as a result, I am worried. My sort of second concern is not only is it potentially going to create this 2-tier system, but also it could create some arguments on the tabletop. You know, where one person is trying to argue that he can definitely see 3 or 4 of that enemy squad. And the opposing player is like, no, mate, you can only see 1. No, you can see 1 or 2, 2 max. And it could really start bogging things down and causing games to kind of get a little frustrating or argumentative. Of course, I could just be over worrying about this, but it's definitely something that I'd want to keep an eye on and just see how the community reacts to these new changes. But with that said, that is all of the most important things about Warhammer 10th edition I think you need to know. Of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you want to support the channel and also unlock a whole bunch of perks, please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By becoming a supporter, one of the biggest things that you can get access to is the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community of almost 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got painting channels, hobbying, tactics, army lists, and of course, a pretty spicy meme section as well. And I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Somewhat Amusing, Armageddon Slayer, Oradina, Thumbtack22, Mark Barlow, Russell Sorenka, Dallas Ososby, Help Me Please, and John Marr. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a massive thank you to Evan Osborne Lomax, Elijah Jankowski, Simon Dolding, Cyberez, and Iron Nerd. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Seriously, guys, thank you so much. Without your generous support, I wouldn't be able to do Mordian Glory full time. And so you have my honest and eternal gratitude. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.